Ethan Davies stood before the altar of judgment, which in this case was a vast mahogany desk, polished to a mirror sheen. Rainwater dripped from the hem of his worn but clean tweed jacket, forming a small, apologetic puddle on the marble floor of the office. He clutched a leather portfolio to his chest, its corners softened and frayed by years of use. It was the only thing about him that felt entirely dry. Across the desk, Marcus Thorne, Chief Operating Officer of Thorne and Sterling Architects, regarded him not as a human being, but as a stain upon his otherwise perfect day. Marcus was a man built of sharp angles and expensive fabrics. His suit was a tailored sheath of charcoal gray, his tie a slash of silver silk. His face, handsome in a severe way, was set in a mask of theatrical disappointment. He tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the resume that lay before him, a document that spoke of prestigious schools and dormant brilliance. 1 hour and 17 minutes, Marcus said, his voice a low, melodious weapon. For the final interview of what you described in your cover letter as your dream position. 1 hour, 17 minutes. He let the words hang in the air, each one a small, perfectly weighted stone. Ethan's own voice when it came was steady, devoid of the panic that fluttered in his chest. My sincerest apologies, Mr. Thorne. There was an unforeseen situation. I helped someone who was in distress. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a slow, deliberate movement designed to convey power. A small, humorless smile played on his lips. A situation, he savored the word as if it were an exotic and slightly rancid delicacy. Let me guess, a kitten in a tree? A damsel on the railroad tracks? His eyes flicked over Ethan's damp clothes, the faint smudge of dirt on his trousers. Or perhaps you wrestled a boar in the city park. The intended humiliation was as clear as the crystal water pitcher on the credenza. Ethan felt the familiar heat rise in his cheeks, a flush of righteous anger he had learned long ago to control. He maintained eye contact, his gaze unflinching. It was a blind woman, sir. She was caught in the sudden downpour and had become disoriented. I helped her get home safely. The simple, unadorned truth landed in the opulent room with a dull thud. For a moment, Marcus seemed taken aback by its lack of drama. He had expected a convoluted, desperate lie. This was pedestrian. He recovered quickly, his smile hardening into a sneer. A blind woman, he repeated, his tone dripping with condescension. How wonderfully, tragically noble. And you sacrificed this opportunity, an opportunity hundreds of highly qualified and notably punctual candidates would kill for, on the altar of your spontaneous charity. He shook his head, a gesture of mock pity. That is either the most pathetic excuse I have ever heard, or you are, quite simply, not the kind of man we hire at Thorne and Sterling. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, which offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a collection of steel and glass monuments to ambition. We build empires here, Mr. Davies. We shape the future. That requires singular focus, ruthless prioritization. It does not allow for distractions, especially not for junior associates who have yet to prove their worth. He turned back, his eyes cold and final. Your portfolio speaks of talent. Your actions speak of unreliability. At Thorne and Sterling, actions are the only language we truly respect. He gestured dismissively towards the door. Thank you for your time, what little of it you managed to grant us. Ethan stood frozen for a beat, the dismissal washing over him. He had known he was late. He had known it was a risk. But he had not anticipated the sheer, unvarnished contempt. He had expected a professional rejection, not a personal dissection. He looked at Marcus Thorne, a man who held the keys to a kingdom Ethan desperately wanted to re-enter, and saw nothing but a hollow crown on a hollow man. He had made a choice on a rain-slicked street corner an hour ago, a choice between ambition and humanity. He did not yet know that it was the only choice that could have saved him. He had walked in here believing he was a poor man begging for a job. Marcus Thorne saw a failure. Neither of them knew the truth. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on a single moment? It's a feeling that can stick with you for a lifetime. We'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And don't forget to let us know where you're watching from. Stick with us because the foundation of this story has just been laid, and the skyscraper of retribution is about to be built. Ethan gave a single, sharp nod. He did not offer excuses or pleas. He simply held the man's gaze for a second longer than was comfortable, a silent act of defiance. Then he turned and walked out of the office, the sound of the heavy door clicking shut behind him like a final judgment. The small puddle on the marble floor was already beginning to evaporate under the relentless, sterile hum of the building's climate control. Marcus Thorne watched him go, a smirk of satisfaction on his face. He had weeded out another weak link. He had protected the integrity of his firm. He returned to his desk, picked up Ethan's resume, and with a flourish of finality, dropped it into the shredder. The machine whirred to life, chewing the story of a man's life into meaningless strips of paper. Marcus did not give it a second thought. The rain had begun without warning, a sudden, violent assault on the city. One moment, the sun was a pale wafer in the hazy sky. The next, the heavens opened. The downpour was biblical, turning streets into shallow rivers and drumming a frantic, chaotic rhythm on the awnings of shops. Ethan Davies stood under one such awning, checking his watch for the 10th time. 10:15. His interview was at 11. Across town. He had left his modest apartment with plenty of time, mapping out the bus route, feeling the familiar thrum of nervous excitement. This was it, the final round. Thorne & Sterling was the most prestigious architectural firm in the country, a place where legends were forged. After 2 years of freelance work, of patching together a living from small, unfulfilling projects, this was his chance to get back, to build, to create something that would last. His suit, a relic from a past life of success, felt both foreign and familiar. It was a well-made, classic cut, but he knew it was a shade out of style. He'd had it dry cleaned, and he'd spent 20 minutes that morning trying to press the collar just right. He needed this to go perfectly. He adjusted his tie and peered out at the churning street, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. The bus was late. Of course it was. It was then that he saw her. She was standing on the corner, completely exposed to the deluge. An elderly woman, thin and frail, with dark glasses and a white cane that swept uselessly through the rushing water at her feet. A canvas bag of groceries lay tipped over by her side, its contents, oranges, a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, bobbing in the grimy urban tide. Cars sped past, sending up great plumes of spray that drenched her further. She was turning her head back and forth, a picture of utter, helpless confusion. Ethan's first instinct was purely logistical. He had 45 minutes. The bus stop was right there. He could be at the Thorne & Sterling building in 25, leaving him a comfortable buffer. He could call for help for her. Someone would come. Someone else. He took a half step toward the street, ready to brave the rain and flag down his bus. But he stopped. He looked back at the woman. Her face, etched with the fine lines of age, was a mask of distress. Her thin coat was plastered to her body, and she shivered, not just from the cold, but from fear. He saw the way her hand, gnarled with arthritis, gripped the white cane as if it were her only anchor in a hostile world. And in that moment, the interview, the mahogany desk, the panoramic city view, it all receded. It became abstract, secondary. Here was something real, a person right in front of him who needed help. His internal debate was brief but fierce. His career, his future, his one shot at redemption versus this stranger, the ghost of his former partner, the one who had betrayed him and cost him his first firm, would have laughed. "Sentiment is a liability, Ethan," he used to say. "Focus on the goal." Ethan took a deep breath, the damp air filling his lungs. He looked at his polished shoes, which were about to be ruined. He looked at his pressed suit, which was about to be soaked. He looked at his one chance, his dream job, slipping away with every passing second. And he made his choice. He stepped out from under the awning and into the storm. The rain was cold, shocking. Within seconds, it plastered his hair to his scalp and soaked through the shoulders of his jacket. He reached the woman's side, his voice calm and gentle over the roar of the downpour. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She flinched, startled by his sudden presence. "Who's there?" Her voice was thin, reedy. "My name is Ethan. I saw you were having some trouble. Can I help you?" He knelt, ignoring the dirty water that soaked the knees of his trousers, and began gathering the escaped groceries. The oranges were easy to catch. The milk carton had thankfully not burst. He tucked the soggy loaf of bread under his arm. "Oh, thank you, young man. Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "The storm, it came so fast. I got turned around. I don't know which way is which." "It's no trouble at all," Ethan said, standing up and offering her the crook of his arm. "Where are you headed? I can walk you home." "You don't have to do that," she protested weakly. "You'll be late for wherever you were going. You're dressed so nicely." Ethan looked down at his rapidly deteriorating suit and managed a small smile she couldn't see. "It's nothing important," he lied. The lie felt surprisingly clean, necessary. "Where to?" She gave him an address a few blocks away. As he had feared, it was in the opposite direction of the bus route he needed. He glanced at his watch. 10:30. It was officially impossible. A strange sense of calm settled over him. The decision was made. The consequences were sealed. Now all that was left was the act itself. "All right then," he said, his voice cheerful. "Let's get you out of this rain." He held his portfolio over her head as a makeshift umbrella, a completely inadequate but sincere gesture. The fine leather which held the designs for buildings that had won awards, and the new ones that lived only in his imagination, was quickly spotted and stained by the rain. He guided her slowly and patiently down the street, matching his long stride to her hesitant steps. He described the path ahead, warning her of puddles and curbs. He didn't rush. He didn't betray a hint of his own internal wreckage. He just walked with her, a stranger in the storm, his dream job dissolving with every step. Ethan guided the elderly woman, whose name he learned was Eleanor, through the roaring chaos of the city storm. The portfolio, his shield, was proving to be a poor one. Rainwater channeled off the leather and down his own arm, soaking him to the bone. He could feel the cold seeping deep into his muscles, a damp chill that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the opportunity he was watching drown before his very eyes. "It's just a bit further," he said, his voice steady despite the chattering of his own teeth. "We're coming up to the corner of Oak and Mabel." "You're a very kind young man," Eleanor said, her grip on his arm surprisingly firm. "Most people would have just walked by or shouted from a doorway." "Most people are in a hurry," Ethan replied, carefully navigating her around a particularly large puddle that had consumed half the sidewalk. "I suppose I am too, but some things are more important." The words came out before he could question them, a simple statement of a creed he hadn't realized he held so dearly. "More important than what?" she asked, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something more than just his voice. "Than being on time," he said simply. He chose not to elaborate. He would not burden this woman with the scale of his sacrifice. To do so would be to cheapen the act, to turn it into a transaction. It was a gift, freely given, and that was all. They finally reached the address she had given him, a modest, slightly run-down apartment building with a faded green awning. It was clean but anonymous, the kind of place you could walk past 1,000 times and never notice. He guided her up the 3 steps to the front door, sheltering her from the wind that whipped around the corner of the building. "Here we are," he said, fumbling with the wet grocery bag and his portfolio to free a hand. Do you have your keys? They're in my pocket, she said, gesturing to her coat. My hands are so cold, I don't think I could manage. With a gentle, respectful touch, he reached into her coat pocket and retrieved a small, simple keychain with 2 keys on it. He found the right one and slid it into the lock, the click of the tumbler turning over sounding loud in the relative quiet of the entryway. He pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit, clean-smelling lobby. He walked her inside, out of the rain at last. Will you be all right from here? He asked. Is there anyone I can call for you? No, I'm fine now, she said, releasing his arm. She turned her face towards him, the dark glasses seeming to look right through him. You've done more than enough. You've ruined your suit, and you've missed your appointment. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. The suit will dry, Ethan said with a shrug. And the appointment, well, there will be other appointments. He didn't believe it, not really, but it was the right thing to say. Perhaps, she said, a strange, thoughtful tone in her voice. What is your name again? Ethan Davies. Well, Ethan Davies, she said, reaching out and placing a cool, dry hand on his wet sleeve. Thank you. You have a good heart. Don't ever let the world convince you that's a weakness. With that, she turned and walked slowly towards the elevator, her cane tapping a steady, confident rhythm on the tiled floor. Ethan watched until the elevator doors slid shut, leaving him alone in the lobby. The silence was absolute. He looked down at himself. His jacket was a ruin. His trousers were streaked with grime. His portfolio was warped and water-stained. He glanced at his watch. 11:45. He was 45 minutes late. Hopelessly, irretrievably late. A wave of despair, cold and sharp, washed over him. He had done the right thing. He knew it in his bones. But the world, especially the world he wanted to be a part of, did not reward the right thing. It rewarded punctuality. It rewarded ruthlessness. It rewarded the very people who would have left that woman shivering on the corner. Still, a part of him, a stubborn, unyielding part, refused to surrender completely. He had come this far. He had passed 2 rounds of interviews. They knew his work. Maybe, just maybe, if he showed up, if he explained himself with dignity, they would understand. It was a fool's hope, but it was the only hope he had. He pushed open the lobby door and ran back out into the rain, flagging down a taxi that was finally, mercifully, slowing down. The ride to the Thorn and Sterling Tower was a blur of self-recrimination and desperate, flickering optimism. He arrived, paid the driver with the last of his cash, and strode into the gleaming, cathedral-like lobby of the skyscraper. He didn't bother trying to fix his appearance. It was pointless. He was a walking disaster. He announced himself to the receptionist, whose professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second as she took in his state. Mr. Davies for Mr. Thorne. I know I'm very late. I have an explanation. She spoke into her headset, her voice a discreet murmur. After a moment, she looked up, her expression unreadable. Mr. Thorne will see you, 40th floor. The elevator ride up was a slow ascent into dread. He rehearsed his explanation, trying to make it sound sincere and responsible, not like the pathetic excuse of a failure. But as the doors slid open to the hushed, impossibly luxurious 40th floor, and he saw Marcus Thorne standing there, framed by the skyline like a king in his court, he knew. He knew that no explanation would ever be enough. The man before him was not a judge. He was an executioner. And as Ethan walked the long, lonely path across the marble floor to that mahogany desk, he felt less like a candidate and more like a condemned man walking his last mile. Marcus leaned against his desk, a posture of casual dominance, and watched Ethan's approach with an air of clinical curiosity. So the noble hero returns from his quest, he began, his voice smooth as polished granite. Tell me, Mr. Davies, did you manage to slay the dragon? As I said, sir, I was helping a blind woman who was caught in a storm. Yes, the blind woman, Marcus said, pushing off the desk and beginning to circle Ethan slowly, like a predator inspecting its prey. A touching, if terribly inconvenient, fable. But we are not in the business of fables here. We are in the business of concrete and steel, of deadlines and budgets, of reality. He stopped in front of Ethan, close enough that Ethan could smell the faint, expensive scent of his cologne, a mix of sandalwood and condescension. And the reality, Mr. Davies, is that you are standing in my office, an hour and a half late, looking like you've been sleeping in a ditch. You are asking me to entrust you with a six-figure salary and multi-million-dollar projects, and you cannot even manage the basic professional courtesy of showing up on time. From the corner of the room, a new voice piped up. He does look a bit of a mess, Dad. Ethan turned his head slightly. A young man, no older than 22, was lounging in a leather armchair. He had his father's severe good looks, but they were softened by a youthful arrogance that hadn't yet hardened into true cruelty. He was dressed in clothes that were aggressively casual, designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, sneakers that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. This was Julian Thorne, Marcus's son and heir apparent. Julian, this is Mr. Davies, Marcus said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He's providing us with a valuable lesson today, a case study in what not to do. Julian sat up, a smirk on his face. So what's the lesson? Don't help old ladies? The lesson, Marcus corrected, his eyes fixed on Ethan, is about priorities. It's about understanding that your commitment to this firm, to your career, must be absolute, unwavering. If a tidal wave were to hit the city, a true professional from Thorne and Sterling would find a way to get to the office, or die trying. We do not accept excuses. We only accept results. He gestured to the battered portfolio Ethan was still clutching to his chest. What's in there, Mr. Davies? The designs for your magnum opus? The blueprint for a new world? He reached out and tapped the wet leather with a dismissive finger. Whatever it is, it's irrelevant now. The vessel is damaged. It's unprofessional. It signals a lack of care, a lack of respect, for your work and for us. The portfolio contained everything. It held the sketches for the community library that had won him a National Student Award. It held the detailed renderings of the waterfront revitalization project he had led at his first firm, before his partner had leveraged him out and taken all the credit. It held the new, innovative designs for sustainable urban housing that he'd been working on for 2 years in his tiny apartment, the work he believed could change the way people lived in cities. It was his past, his present, and his future, all bound in worn leather. Ethan's jaw tightened. The insults to his person he could bear. The dismissal of his work, that was a deeper cut. My work speaks for itself, sir, he said, his voice low but firm. Does it? Marcus countered, his eyebrows raised in mock surprise. Right now, the only thing speaking is your catastrophic lack of judgment. You chose a nameless, faceless stranger over a career-defining opportunity. That tells me everything I need to know about your business acumen. It's non-existent. He walked back to his desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. He was enjoying this. It was a performance, and he had a captive audience in his son. Look at him, Julian. This is what desperation looks like. He's so desperate for this job that he's willing to stand here and endure this humiliation, hoping for a scrap of pity. The accusation of desperation stung more than anything else, because it felt partially true. He was desperate, not for the money, though that would help, but for the work, for the chance to feel worthy again. But Marcus Thorne couldn't see that. He saw only the surface, the damp suit and the late arrival. He saw a poor man, a failure, and he treated him accordingly. Let this be a lesson in vetting, son, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a professorial tone. A resume can be impressive. A portfolio can show promise. But character is revealed under pressure. And Mr. Davies has just revealed his. He is sentimental. He is unreliable. He is, in short, a liability. He looked at Ethan, his eyes cold and devoid of any empathy. "We're done here, Mr. Davies. I suggest you go home and find a towel, and perhaps reconsider your career path. Philanthropy, perhaps. Architecture requires a stronger spine." The dismissal was absolute, brutal, and public. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He had been stripped bare, his best intentions twisted into character flaws, his dignity shredded for the amusement of a man and his son. He didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. He turned, the weight of the portfolio suddenly feeling immense, and walked out of the office for the second time. This time, he didn't hear the door click shut. He was already a world away, the echoes of Marcus Thorne's laughter ringing in his ears. Ethan rode the elevator down from the 40th floor in a state of suspended animation. The car was silent, swift, and mirrored on all sides, forcing him to confront the image Marcus Thorne had painted of him, a disheveled, pathetic failure. He saw the damp, clinging fabric of his jacket, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he still gripped the stained portfolio like a child's security blanket. For a moment, he almost believed the image himself. The humiliation had been so complete, so expertly delivered, that it had nearly breached the walls of his own self-worth. But as the elevator doors opened into the magnificent lobby, something shifted. The anger, which he had so carefully suppressed in Marcus's office, began to burn. It was a clean, pure flame. It wasn't the wild, destructive fire of a man lashing out. It was the focused, intense heat of a forge, the kind that can burn away impurities and temper steel. He walked through the lobby, not with the slumped shoulders of the defeated, but with the rigid posture of the wronged. He did not see the security guards who watched him, or the executives who passed him by. He saw only the path ahead. He stepped out into the city. The rain had softened to a fine, persistent drizzle. The world was gray and indistinct, matching the turmoil inside him. He walked without a destination, his feet carrying him through the crowded streets. He thought of Marcus Thorne's words: sentimental, unreliable, a liability. He thought of Julian Thorne's smug, empty face, learning cruelty at his father's knee. They hadn't just rejected him, they had tried to diminish him. They had tried to make him feel small so that they could feel large. And they had done it based on a single, superficial assessment, blind to the truth of the situation, blind to the character of the man standing before them. They were the ones who were blind, not the woman he had helped. He walked for nearly an hour, the city a blur around him, until he found himself in the familiar, humbler neighborhood where he lived. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his small, one-bedroom apartment. The space was sparse, but orderly. A drafting table covered with sketches and blueprints dominated the living room. Books on architectural theory and history were stacked in neat piles on the floor. It was the home of a man who cared about one thing above all else: his work. He dropped his keys into a small ceramic bowl by the door and walked over to the drafting table. He carefully laid the damp, warped portfolio down. For a long moment, he just looked at it, this symbol of his life's passion, now stained and abused. He ran a hand over the rough, bubbled leather. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he unfastened the clasps. He didn't look at the architectural drawings inside, not yet. Instead, he reached into a hidden flap on the interior, a pocket he had stitched in himself years ago. From it, he pulled a single, folded document. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a bank statement. He unfolded it and laid it on the table. The name at the top was his: Ethan Davies. The balance at the bottom of the page was printed in stark black ink: $8,412,547.32. This was the truth that Marcus Thorne could not see. This was the secret that lay hidden beneath the worn tweed jacket and the desperate need for a job. It was the settlement from his betrayal, the result of a brutal 2-year legal battle after his former partner had forced him out of their wildly successful first firm. He had won. He had gotten the money, but he had lost his name, his reputation, and his will to fight. The money had sat in a low-yield investment account, a silent monument to his failure. He had lived modestly, almost ascetically, not because he was poor, but because the wealth felt like a consolation prize for the one thing he truly wanted, the right to build. He had wanted the job at Thorne and Sterling not for the salary, but for the legitimacy, for the chance to work with the best, to prove to himself that the betrayal hadn't broken him. He had wanted to earn his way back, not buy it. But Marcus Thorne had changed the equation. He had made it personal. He had attacked Ethan's character, his very core, and in doing so, he had awakened a part of Ethan that had been dormant for years. The fighter, the strategist, the man who had built a firm from nothing once before. He stared at the bank statement, the numbers seeming to glow in the dim light of the apartment. The money was no longer a monument to his failure. It was a weapon. It was leverage. And he was, for the first time in a long time, ready to use it. He picked up his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, past the names of freelance clients and material suppliers, until he found a number he hadn't called in over 2 years. A name from his past life. Benjamin Carter, the sharpest, most ruthless corporate lawyer in the city, the man who had won him his settlement. Ethan pressed the call button. It rang twice. Ben Carter. The voice was as crisp and efficient as Ethan remembered. Ben, it's Ethan Davies. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ethan, my God, I was wondering if you'd fallen off the face of the earth. Are you all right? I'm better than all right, Ben, Ethan said, his voice quiet but infused with a new cold energy. I need your help. I want you to do some research for me. On a firm, Thorne and Sterling. Thorne and Sterling? Carter sounded surprised. The top of the mountain. What's your interest? I have a feeling, Ethan said, his eyes drifting from the bank statement to the Rain Street window, that they have a structural weakness, and I want you to find it. A low chuckle came through the phone. Now this is the Ethan Davies I remember. It's good to have you back. Consider it done. Ethan hung up the phone. He felt a profound sense of clarity. The humiliation was no longer a wound. It was a catalyst. Marcus Thorne thought he had crushed a desperate poor man. He had no idea he had just declared war on a king in exile. The evening descended upon the Thorne residence, a sprawling modern mansion in the city's most exclusive suburb. Glass walls looked out onto manicured gardens and an infinity pool that glowed in ethereal blue in the twilight. Inside, Marcus, his wife Amelia, and their son Julian sat down to a dinner served by a silent, uniformed housekeeper. The table was set with heirloom silver in fine china, a stark contrast to the takeout container Ethan Davies was likely eating from in his drab apartment. You were brilliant today, Dad, Julian said, raising a glass of sparkling water. The way you handled that tramp. Marcus inclined his head, accepting the compliment as his due. It wasn't about brilliance, Julian. It was about standards. You let one crack appear in the foundation, and the whole structure is compromised. That man was a crack. Amelia Thorne, a woman whose elegance was as carefully constructed as the house around her, gave a delicate shudder. He was so damp. Did you have the floor cleaned after he left? Immediately, Marcus assured her, and his resume was ceremonially shredded, a fitting end. He took a sip of his wine, a vintage that cost more than Ethan's suit. He told me he was late because he was helping a blind woman. He laughed, a short, sharp bark. Can you imagine? As if that's a legitimate excuse for anything in the professional world. So sentimental, Julian scoffed, perfectly mimicking his father's earlier tone. Probably thinks he's the hero of his own little story. Everyone's the hero of their own story, Marcus said, cutting into his perfectly cooked fillet of sea bass. The key is to make sure your story is the one that actually matters. His doesn't. Amelia, who had been a silent enabler to her husband's arrogance for 2 decades, finally spoke. Was it really necessary to bring Julian into it? To be so harsh? There was a flicker of discomfort in her eyes, a faint echo of a conscience long since silenced. Marcus put down his fork and looked at her, his expression hardening slightly. Necessary? It was essential. Julian needs to learn. This world isn't kind, Amelia. It's a battlefield. You either dominate or you get dominated. That man today was a lesson in weakness. I want our son to learn from it, not to pity it. He turned his gaze to Julian. Don't ever pity weakness, son. It's a cancer. You cut it out, swiftly and without emotion. I understand, Dad, Julian said, his back straightening. The flicker of doubt in his mother's eyes was lost on him. He saw only his father's strength, his confidence, and he wanted to emulate it. The conversation shifted to a topic of far greater importance, the Vance Legacy Tower. It was the project of a lifetime, a 50-story mixed-use skyscraper set to redefine the city's skyline. More importantly, it was personally funded by the firm's enigmatic and reclusive founder, Eleanor Vance, Marcus's own aunt. Aunt Eleanor has approved the preliminary budget, Marcus announced, his voice filled with pride. She's leaving the design and execution entirely in my hands. She trusts me. As she should, Amelia said, her earlier unease forgotten. The mention of the Vance fortune always had a soothing effect on her. You've tripled the firm's value since she stepped back. This tower will be my legacy, Marcus continued, his eyes gleaming with ambition. It will be a Thorn Tower in all but name. When people look at the skyline, they will see my vision, my power. He was no longer just the COO running his aunt's company. In his mind, he was the true architect of its success, the rightful heir to its throne. Eleanor was just a name on the letterhead, a distant source of capital. He was the one in the arena. Have you decided on the lead architect for the project? Julian asked. I'm considering a few of our senior partners, Marcus said thoughtfully, but ultimately I will be the final authority on every design choice, from the foundation to the spire. They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments, the three of them secure in their perfect world, insulated by wealth and status from the messy, inconvenient realities of people like Ethan Davies. They were the builders, the winners, the ones who mattered. The idea that their perfect world had a fatal structural flaw, an unaccounted for variable, was impossible. The idea that the sentimental tramp from that afternoon could be a threat was not just unlikely, it was laughable. As the housekeeper cleared the plates, Marcus glanced at his phone. A news alert popped up. A major investment fund, Blackwood Capital, had just announced a surprise acquisition of a smaller, innovative tech firm. Marcus grunted. Vultures, all of them, buying up other people's hard work. He had no idea that the majority stakeholder in Blackwood Capital, the unseen force behind the acquisition, was a man named Ethan Davies, who had just instructed his lawyer to start digging. The king in exile was moving his pieces on the board, and the Thorns, in their glass house, were celebrating a victory in a game they didn't even know they were playing. 3 days passed. For Marcus Thorn, they were days of triumph and planning. He held meetings about the Vance Legacy Tower, his authority unquestioned. He moved models around on a vast architectural table, his pronouncements on load-bearing walls and curtain glass facades treated as gospel. The memory of Ethan Davies had faded completely, a minor annoyance that had been efficiently dealt with and forgotten. On the 4th day, a letter arrived at Ethan's apartment. It was from Thorne and Sterling, the official rejection. Ethan had been expecting it, but he hadn't expected the tone. It wasn't a standard, polite form letter. It was a personalized missive, dictated by Marcus himself. Dear Mr. Davies, it began, following your recent final interview, We are writing to inform you that we will not be moving forward with your candidacy. While your portfolio demonstrated a certain technical proficiency, your conduct on the day of the interview revealed a profound lack of professionalism, poor judgment, and a general disposition unsuited to the demanding environment of our firm. We require individuals who demonstrate unwavering commitment and impeccable reliability. Your actions proved you possess neither. We wish you the best in finding a career path more suited to your particular priorities. Ethan read the letter twice. The cruelty was so gratuitous, so unnecessary. It was one thing to be humiliated in person. It was another to have that humiliation codified, printed on expensive letterhead, and sent to his home. It was designed to be the final nail in the coffin of his ambition. Marcus wasn't just closing a door. He was trying to burn down the house. This letter was his list of grievances. It was the tangible proof of the injustice. He folded it carefully and placed it on his drafting table, next to the bank statement. They were two sides of the same story, the lie they believed and the truth they ignored. As Ethan stared at the letter, his phone buzzed. It was Ben Carter. "I have something for you," Ben said, his voice crackling with the excitement of a hunter who has found a trail. Thorn in Sterling looks like a fortress from the outside, but the whole thing is built on a single pillar. Eleanor Vance. "The founder," Ethan said. "Marcus's aunt. She's a recluse, isn't she?" "That's the company line," Ben replied. "But it's not the whole truth. She's not just the founder, she's the sole shareholder. The firm is a private entity. Marcus is the COO, but he's an employee. He owns nothing. His power is entirely granted by her. If she decides to, she could remove him with a single phone call." Ethan felt a jolt of electricity. Why hasn't she? From what I saw, the man is a tyrant. "That's the interesting part," Ben continued. "I dug into some old articles, talked to a few retired journalists. Eleanor Vance was a brilliant architect in her own right, but she was betrayed by her original partners 30 years ago. They tried to force her out of her own company. She fought back and won, but it changed her. She became intensely private, obsessed with loyalty and character. She put her nephew, her sister's boy, in charge because he was family. She thought blood was thicker than water." Ethan's mind raced, connecting the pieces. A woman betrayed by her partners. An obsession with character. "There's more," Ben said, his voice dropping. "For the last 10 years there have been whispers, rumors that Eleanor, who is notoriously paranoid about who she hires for top positions, has an unconventional final test for candidates. She supposedly uses elaborate disguises to interact with them outside the office, to see who they really are when they think no one is looking." The world tilted on its axis. Ethan looked at his hands, remembering the feel of the cold keys, the texture of the woman's damp coat. He remembered her words, "You have a good heart. Don't ever let the world convince you that's a weakness." "Ben," Ethan said slowly, his heart pounding, "the woman I helped, the blind woman, her name was Eleanor." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, then a low whistle. "Oh, Marcus," Ben breathed, "you magnificent, arrogant fool. You have no idea what you've done." Meanwhile, across the city, in a penthouse apartment that dwarfed even Marcus's mansion, Eleanor Vance stood without her dark glasses. Her eyes, a sharp and intelligent blue, scanned a detailed report on a tablet. The report was a complete dossier on Ethan Davies, his education, his first firm, the betrayal by his partner, the lawsuit, the settlement. It even included a summary of his modest lifestyle for the past 2 years. Her assistant, a sharp woman named Maria, who had been with her for decades, stood by quietly. "The rejection letter was sent this morning, as you predicted," Maria said. "It was unnecessarily cruel." Eleanor nodded, not looking up from the tablet. "Marcus has always mistaken cruelty for strength. He learned it from his father." She finished the report and set the tablet down. She looked out the window at the city she had helped build, her gaze eventually falling on the gleaming tower of Thorn and Sterling. "He is the one," she said, her voice calm and absolute. "Ethan Davies. He has the talent, the resilience, and more importantly, the character. The very thing my nephew so profoundly lacks." She turned to Maria, her expression now firm, decisive. "Arrange an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. The official topic will be the final design approval for the Vance Legacy Tower. Make sure every board member is there. And Maria," she added, a glint of steel in her eyes, "make sure my nephew is front and center. I want him to have a very good seat for the show." The quiet before the storm had just ended. The first drops of a hurricane were beginning to fall. The boardroom at Thorn and Sterling was Marcus's cathedral. It was a space designed to inspire awe and assert dominance. A single, colossal table of polished black granite ran the length of the room, surrounded by 20 high-backed leather chairs. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the city. Today, the room was filled. The board members, a collection of seasoned executives and legal advisors who managed the Vance Trust, were all present. They had been summoned with an urgency that signaled an event of great importance. Marcus stood at the head of the table, a conductor before his orchestra. He felt invincible. This was his moment. The summons had been sudden, but he knew what it was about. His aunt, in her eccentric way, wanted to rubber stamp the Legacy Tower project with the full board present. It was a formality, but a welcome one. It would cement his authority in front of everyone. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice resonating with confidence. "Thank you for assembling on such short notice. As you know, we are on the cusp of the most significant project in this firm's history, the Vance Legacy Tower. I have spent the last week finalizing my strategic vision for the project, and I am here today to present it for your final approval." He gestured to a large screen at the end of the room, where a stunning 3D model of a sleek, ambitious skyscraper glowed. "This design is not merely a building, it is a statement, a testament to the power and forward-thinking vision of Thorn and Sterling under my leadership." He launched into his presentation, his words flowing with practiced ease. He spoke of structural integrity, of aesthetic harmony, of market impact. He was charming, authoritative, and completely in control. The board members listened, their expressions ranging from impressed to neutral. To them, this was Marcus's show. He was the chosen one, Eleanor Vance's nephew, the man who ran the empire. He was just reaching his crescendo, describing the magnificent spire that would crown the building, when the grand double doors at the far end of the boardroom swung silently open. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was Ethan Davies. He was not the disheveled, rain-soaked man from 4 days ago. He was transformed. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, a crisp white shirt, and a simple, elegant navy tie. His hair was perfectly styled. He looked poised, confident, and utterly out of place. He carried the same worn leather portfolio, but now, instead of a shield, it looked like a weapon held in reserve. Marcus froze mid-sentence, his mouth agape. A wave of disbelief, followed by pure fury, washed over him. How dare he? How dare this nobody, this reject, interrupt the most important meeting of his life? "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus's voice was a low growl, vibrating with rage. The confident presenter was gone, replaced by a petty tyrant whose authority had been challenged. "Who let you up here?" "Security," he boomed, his face turning a blotchy red. "Get this man out of my boardroom." 2 security guards who stood by the door started to move forward, but they stopped as Ethan took a single, calm step into the room. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at the stunned board members. His eyes were fixed on the empty space behind him in the doorway. As if on cue, a figure emerged from the hallway to stand beside him. It was a woman. She was tall, elegant, with sharp blue eyes and silver hair swept back in a sophisticated chignon. She wore a tailored dress the color of steel, and she radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. It was the woman from the storm. The room fell into a profound silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. The board members stared, their eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning recognition. They had seen her in photographs, in old company reports. It was her. Eleanor Vance, no longer a recluse, no longer a myth, and certainly not blind. Marcus stared, his face a mask of horror. His mind refused to process what he was seeing. It was impossible. His aunt was a frail old woman who lived in seclusion. The woman he helped. The blind woman. The excuse. The fable. It was all a collision of realities his brain could not reconcile. Aunt Eleanor? He stammered, the name a foreign object in his mouth. Eleanor Vance's gaze, as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, swept across the room and landed on her nephew. She ignored his question. Her voice when she spoke was not the thin, reedy tone of the woman in the rain. It was clear, commanding, and cold as ice. You were saying something about your vision, Marcus, she said, taking a slow step into the room, Ethan Davies moving with her like a trusted lieutenant. Your leadership, please, continue. Then she paused, her eyes locking onto his. But before you do, I believe you have an apology to offer. To Mr. Davies. The statement landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. It was not a request. It was an order. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably reversed. Marcus Thorne, the king in his cathedral, was suddenly a small, frightened boy in the headmistress's office, and he was just beginning to understand the catastrophic scale of his miscalculation. Marcus Thorne's world had been built on a foundation of unshakable certainties. His own superiority, his aunt's absence, and his inherited authority. In the space of 30 seconds, Eleanor Vance had demolished all three. He stood at the head of the table, his face pale, his confident posture crumbling. The board members who moments ago had been his deferential audience now looked only at Eleanor, their allegiance shifting as visibly as iron filings aligning to a powerful magnet. Apology? Marcus sputtered, the word catching in his throat. For what? For upholding the standards of this firm? For dismissing a candidate who showed up late and unprofessional? He was grasping for the familiar footing of his own righteousness, but the ground was giving way beneath him. Eleanor walked slowly toward the table, her heels clicking with deliberate precision on the polished floor. Ethan remained by the door, a silent, watchful presence. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man whose faith in justice had just been affirmed. Let me clarify the standards of this firm for you, nephew, Eleanor said, her voice dangerously quiet. She stopped beside the chair at the head of the table, Marcus's chair, and ran a hand along its leather back. The first and most important standard of Thorne and Sterling is character. It is the bedrock upon which everything else is built. Talent without character is a liability. Ambition without integrity is a cancer. She used his own words against him, turning them into weapons. Marcus flinched as if he'd been struck. You speak of professionalism, she continued, her gaze sweeping over the silent board. Let me tell you what I saw of Mr. Davies' professionalism. I saw a man who, on his way to the most important interview of his life, chose to help a stranger in distress. He did so without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. He sacrificed his own opportunity for the sake of a human being. That is not a lack of judgment, Marcus. That is the very definition of character. She then turned her story to the room. I was that stranger, she announced, though most had already deduced it. A quiet gasp went through the room. For an hour, I was a frail, blind, and helpless woman at the mercy of the city. Mr. Davies was my only salvation. He was patient. He was kind. He was respectful. He got me home safely, ruining his suit and his chances at this job in the process. He did not know who I was. He simply did what was right. Her gaze snapped back to Marcus, and all warmth vanished from her voice. And what did you do, Marcus? You, who holds the power of this firm in your hands. You took this act of profound decency and you twisted it. You used it as an excuse to belittle and humiliate him. You mocked his compassion. You attacked his dignity. You did it for your own sport, to posture in front of your son, to whom you are teaching the very same lessons of arrogance and cruelty that your father taught you. The mention of his father was a deep, deliberate cut. Marcus visibly recoiled. And then, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room, you sent him a letter so needlessly cruel, so dripping with contempt, that it served no purpose other than to wound a man you already believed was beaten. She looked at Ethan. Mr. Davies, would you do me the honor? Ethan stepped forward and opened his portfolio. From it, he produced 2 documents. The first was the rejection letter. He handed it to Eleanor. She didn't read it. She held it up for the board to see. This, she said, her voice ringing with condemnation, is not the standard of Thorne and Sterling. This is the standard of a petty tyrant who mistakes his position for a throne. She let the letter fall to the table. So no, Marcus, you will not be apologizing for upholding standards. You will be apologizing for failing to recognize them. You will apologize for your cruelty, for your arrogance, and for your profound blindness. A blindness far more debilitating than the one I was feigning. The moral mirror she held up was flawless, reflecting his own ugliness back at him with perfect, horrifying clarity. He looked around the table, searching for an ally, a friendly face. He found none. The board members stared at him with cold, appraising eyes. They were not looking at the powerful COO anymore. They were looking at a liability. His bravado shattered. Panic began to set in. Aunt Eleanor, I didn't know. If I had known it was you. That is the entire point, she thundered, her voice cracking like a whip. The sudden volume made everyone jump. You shouldn't have to know. A person's worth is not determined by their status or their connection to me. A person's worth is inherent. You treated him this way because you thought he was a nobody. You thought he was poor and desperate and powerless. And that revealed everything about you, not him. She paused, letting the weight of her condemnation settle. Now, the apology. Marcus stood frozen, trapped between his pride and his terror. To apologize would be to admit defeat, to surrender everything. Not to apologize would be to defy the absolute power in the room. He was paralyzed. Eleanor's patience, it was clear, was at an end. Very well, she said, her voice returning to an icy calm. If you will not speak, I will. She picked up the second document Ethan had brought. It was a thick, bound report. This is a dossier on Mr. Ethan Davies, compiled at my request. I imagine you only glanced at his resume, Marcus. Allow me to fill in the gaps for you and for the board. The reversal of fortune was no longer impending. It had arrived. Marcus Thorne was no longer the judge. He was the one being judged, and the evidence against him was about to be read into the permanent record. Eleanor Vance held the dossier on Ethan Davies, but she did not need to read from it. She knew its contents by heart. Her gaze was fixed on her nephew, but her words were for the entire room. Mr. Ethan Davies graduated first in his class from the Yale School of Architecture, she began, her voice crisp and clear. His student project, a design for a sustainable community library, won the National Pritzker Student Prize. Perhaps you remember it, Marcus. This firm submitted a bid for a similar municipal project that year and lost. The city council cited Mr. Davies' innovative approach as the deciding factor. A murmur went through the board members. Marcus's face was ashen. He remembered the loss, a stinging humiliation at the time. He had never bothered to learn the name of the student who had outshone him. After graduation, Eleanor continued, Mr. Davies co-founded a boutique firm, Davies Lynch. Within 5 years, they were the most talked-about new firm in the country, specializing in green urban renewal. Their work was brilliant, profitable, and ethically sound. Mr. Davies was the lead designer, the creative force. She paused, letting the information sink in. Then his partner, Mr. Lynch, a man of considerable ambition and questionable ethics, leveraged a hostile buyout using tactics that were legally ambiguous. He forced Mr. Davies out of his own company, taking control of their shared intellectual property. Ethan stood impassively, but inside, hearing his story told with such clarity and validation was a balm on a wound he had carried for years. Mr. Davies, a man of principle, could have gone to the press, Eleanor said, her eyes boring into Marcus. He could have created a scandal that would have destroyed the firm he had built. He did not. Instead, he pursued his rights through the proper legal channels. After a 2-year battle, he won a significant settlement. Mr. Davies is not a poor man, Marcus. He is not desperate. In fact, she let a small, sharp smile touch her lips. His current net worth is likely greater than your own. This revelation sent a second shockwave through the room. The board members looked from Marcus's crumbling facade to Ethan's calm, dignified posture. The entire narrative had been inverted. For the past 2 years, Eleanor went on, Mr. Davies has lived quietly. He did not want to use his money to buy his way back into the industry. He wanted to earn it. He applied to Thorne and Sterling not for a salary, but for an opportunity. The opportunity to do the work he loves, in a place he believed still valued excellence. Her voice was laced with irony. It seems he was mistaken about our values, or at least the values of our current management. She closed the dossier with a quiet thud. The sound echoed in the silent room. And that brings us to the Vance Legacy Tower, she said, her tone shifting from historical to immediate. This project is not just a building. It is a symbol of my legacy, of this firm's future. It requires a leader with vision, with integrity, and with character. It requires a true architect. She turned and looked directly at Ethan Davies. Which is why, effective immediately, I am dissolving the position of Chief Operating Officer. The leadership of Thorne and Sterling will be restructured, and the Vance Legacy Tower project will be placed under the sole direction of our newest senior partner. She held out a hand to Ethan. Mr. Ethan Davies. It was done. The reversal was total and absolute. In a single devastating speech, Eleanor had stripped Marcus of his title, his authority, and his legacy project, and handed it all to the man he had humiliated. The color drained completely from Marcus's face. He stumbled back a step, his hand gripping the back of his chair for support. "No," he whispered. "You can't. This is my firm. I built it." "You managed it," Eleanor corrected, her voice like flint. "You managed the company I built, and you have managed it into a place of moral bankruptcy. This is not a punishment, Marcus. It is a course correction." Desperation clawed its way past his pride. He turned to the board members, his eyes pleading. "You can't let her do this. I have contracts, a position." The firm's lead counsel, a grim-faced man named Abernathy, cleared his throat. "Your employment contract, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice devoid of sympathy, "contains a clause, personally inserted by Ms. Vance 30 years ago, that gives her sole and absolute discretion to terminate any executive officer for actions she deems detrimental to the firm's character or reputation. Her decision is final and not subject to appeal." The finality of it broke him. Marcus Thorne, the master of the universe, crumpled. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking. He was looking at Eleanor now, all pretense of strength gone. "Aunt Eleanor, please, don't do this. It's all I have." Eleanor looked at her nephew, the broken man before her, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than anger showed in her eyes. It was not pity, it was a deep, profound sadness. "You are still a young man, Marcus," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "You have wealth. You have your family. What you have lost today is a position, a title. It is up to you whether you have also lost your soul." She turned away from him, a silent dismissal more powerful than any shout. Her attention was now solely on Ethan. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice now warm and professional. "Welcome to Thorne and Sterling. Your office is waiting. It has a rather splendid view." The immediate aftermath in the boardroom was a study in contrasts. As Eleanor and Ethan spoke quietly to one side with Mr. Abernathy discussing the transition, Marcus Thorne remained frozen by his now former chair. He was a statue of disbelief, his mind unable to process the speed and totality of his downfall. The other board members, paragons of self-preservation, began to gather their papers, avoiding his gaze as if his failure were contagious. They offered quiet, respectful congratulations to Ethan, their handshakes firm, their smiles genuine. They were aligning with the new center of power. Julian Thorne, who had been brought in to witness his father's triumph, had watched the entire exchange from his seat against the wall. His smug smirk had long since vanished, replaced by a look of pale, slack-jawed horror. He saw his father, the invincible giant of his world, crumble into a pleading, broken man. He saw the man he had dismissed as a tramp being handed the keys to the kingdom. The lesson his father had intended for him, a lesson in ruthless power, had been turned on its head. He was now receiving a far more potent education in consequence. As the board members filed out, leaving the vast room nearly empty, Julian finally moved. He walked over to his father, who hadn't budged. "Dad," he said, his voice small. Marcus didn't respond. He stared at the spot where Eleanor had stood, as if he could will her back and rewind the last 20 minutes. Amelia Thorne had been called by one of the board members and told only that she needed to come to the office immediately. She arrived in the 40th floor reception area just as Ethan and Eleanor were emerging from the boardroom. She saw Ethan first, his confident posture, the way the remaining staff looked at him with newfound respect. Then she saw Eleanor, and she froze. She had not seen her husband's aunt in person in 5 years. "Amelia," Eleanor said, her tone neutral, "your husband is in the boardroom. He needs you." Amelia looked from Eleanor's powerful, composed face to the open doors of the boardroom, a sense of dread washing over her. She hurried inside. The scene that greeted her was devastating. The room felt like a battlefield after the fighting was over, and her husband was the primary casualty. "Marcus, what happened?" she asked, rushing to his side. He finally looked at her, his eyes hollow. "She took it all," he whispered. "Everything." It was in this moment that Amelia, the silent enabler, faced her choice. For 2 decades, she had enjoyed the fruits of her husband's position, the wealth, the status, the beautiful homes. She had ignored his arrogance, excused his cruelty, and placated her own conscience with the comforts his power provided. Now that power was gone. She could stand by the broken man before her, or she could try to salvage her own position, her own connection to the Vance dynasty. She looked at her son Julian, whose face was a mixture of fear and confusion. She looked at her husband, stripped of everything that had defined him, and a lifetime of suppressed integrity stirred within her. "What did you do, Marcus?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm, not with accusation, but with a genuine need to understand. He couldn't answer. He just shook his head, a gesture of pathetic self-pity. From the doorway, Eleanor's voice cut in. She had not left. "He was given a test of character, Amelia. He failed." Amelia turned to face her husband's aunt. She straightened her back. the choice was made. "What can we do to fix it?" she asked. It was the "we" that mattered. In that single word, she chose her husband, her family, over any attempt to curry favor with the new power structure. Eleanor regarded her for a long moment. "There is nothing to fix here, today," she said, her voice softening slightly. "Marcus's position at this firm is over. That is a consequence of his own actions. What you do as a family, how you rebuild, that is up to you." She gave a small nod, a gesture of respect for Amelia's choice, and then she and Ethan finally left, leaving the Thorne family alone in the wreckage of their lives. Down the hall, Eleanor led Ethan to a large corner office. It was Marcus's old office. The mahogany desk was still there. The panoramic view was just as stunning. "I'll have all this changed, of course," Eleanor said, gesturing at the opulent furnishings. "It's a bit tyrannical for my taste, and for yours, I suspect." Ethan walked to the window and looked out at the city. It was the same view Marcus had used to intimidate him, but it felt different now. It was not a symbol of power over others, but a vista of possibilities, a canvas. "The view is fine," he said quietly. "It's the desk that's too big." Eleanor smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "I knew you were the one," she said. "The moment you used your own portfolio to shield an old woman's head from the rain, I knew. That portfolio is your life's work. It's precious, and you didn't hesitate to risk it for a stranger." Ethan looked at the portfolio, which he had placed on the corner of the massive desk. The water stains were still there, a permanent reminder of the choice he had made. "There will be a transition period," Eleanor continued, her tone all business again. "The board is behind you. The staff will follow. The legacy tower is yours, Ethan. Design it, build it, make it something that stands not for arrogance, but for integrity." He turned to face her, a deep, heartfelt gratitude in his eyes. "Eleanor, I don't know what to say. Thank you." "Don't thank me," she said, her expression serious. "You earned this. You passed the test. Not my test, Ethan, the world's. Now, show them what a man of character can build." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change at Thorne and Sterling. Under the joint leadership of Eleanor Vance, who had resumed an active role as chairwoman, and Ethan Davies, the new head of design and development, the very culture of the firm began to shift. The atmosphere of fear and sycophancy that had thrived under Marcus evaporated, replaced by a collaborative and respectful energy. Ethan, true to his word, had the monstrous mahogany desk removed from his office, replacing it with a simple, functional drafting table where he could work alongside his team. He made it a point to meet with every employee, from senior partners to junior draftsmen and administrative staff. He listened. He learned their names. He asked for their ideas. One of his first hires was a young intern named Sarah, whom he had noticed in the background on the day of his humiliation. She had been unable to meet his eyes, her face flushed with shame at her boss's behavior. Ethan saw in her a decency that deserved to be nurtured. He offered her a full-time position on the Legacy Tower project team. The gratitude in her eyes was all the confirmation he needed. The Vance Legacy Tower was his primary focus. He threw himself into the work, his mind alive with ideas that had been dormant for too long. He scrapped Marcus's ostentatious, self-aggrandizing design and started from scratch. His new concept was bold and innovative, but also deeply human-centric. It incorporated green spaces, public art installations, and sustainable energy systems. It was a building designed not just to be looked at, but to be lived in, to serve the community that surrounded it. It was a building with character. One afternoon, about a month after the fateful board meeting, there was a knock on his open office door. It was Marcus Thorne. He looked diminished. The expensive suit was still there, but it hung on him differently. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary, haunted look. He had lost weight. "Mr. Davies," he said, his voice quiet, hesitant. "Ethan, do you have a moment?" Ethan looked up from his blueprints and gestured to the simple chair opposite his drafting table. "Marcus, please, come in." Marcus sat, his hands clasped nervously in his lap. He looked around the office, at the collaborative sketches pinned to the walls, the models of the new tower, the lack of a barrier-like desk. It was a different world. I'm not here to ask for anything," Marcus began, his gaze fixed on the floor. I wanted to apologize." He finally looked up, and Ethan saw a flicker of genuine remorse in his eyes. "What I did to you, how I treated you, there was no excuse. It was cruel. It was wrong. I was so convinced of my own importance, I couldn't see the person standing in front of me. I see that now." He took a shaky breath. "My wife, Amelia, she's been making me see a lot of things. About myself, about the man I became." He shook his head slowly. "My son, he looks at me differently now. Not with admiration, with pity. The very thing I told him never to feel." Ethan listened without interrupting. He felt no sense of triumph, no desire to rub salt in the wound. He felt only a quiet sadness for the waste of it all. "I lost everything I thought mattered," Marcus continued. "But Amelia says, she says maybe I have a chance to find something that actually does. I don't know if she's right, but I know that it had to start here, with you. I am truly sorry." The apology was not eloquent. It was not grand, but it was real. Ethan could feel the truth of it. He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Marcus," he said sincerely. "I accept your apology." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "You know, for years I saw myself as a victim of a great injustice. My first partner betrayed me, and I let that betrayal define me. I let it make me small. I lived like a poor man because I felt poor in spirit." He leaned forward, his eyes connecting with Marcus's. "You did me a great injustice in this office a month ago, but you also did me an unintentional favor. You reminded me who I am. You reminded me that true strength isn't about power or position. It's about holding on to your integrity when it's tested. It's about choosing to help the person in the rain, no matter the cost." He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling city below. "You lost a title, Marcus. You lost a position, but you still have your family. You still have a chance to decide what kind of man you want to be. Don't waste that chance. I wasted 2 years of my life feeling sorry for myself. Don't make the same mistake." It was not absolution. It was not forgiveness in the sense of wiping the slate clean. It was something more valuable, a piece of hard-won wisdom offered without judgment. Marcus stood up, a flicker of something like hope in his tired eyes. "Thank you," he said again, the words carrying a different weight this time. He turned and left the office, his steps a little less heavy than when he had arrived. Ethan remained at the window, watching the endless flow of people on the streets below. Each one of them a story, each one of them facing their own tests, big and small. He had faced his, and through an act of simple kindness, had found his way back to himself. His gaze drifted to the empty space in the skyline where the Vance Legacy Tower would one day stand. He felt a profound sense of peace and a quiet, thrilling excitement. The foundation had been laid. It was time to build. True worth is not measured by the suit you wear or the title on your door, but by the choices you make when you think no one is watching. It's measured in acts of kindness, in moments of integrity. Marcus Thorne learned that lesson at a great cost, while Ethan Davies was rewarded for never forgetting it. In the end, we don't build our legacies with steel and glass, but with the character we show to the world, especially to those we believe have nothing to offer us. What do you think is the most important quality in a leader? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Your insights and stories inspire us every day. If you were moved by Ethan's journey, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of integrity. Thank you for watching, and remember, The strongest foundations are the ones that can't be seen.